Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Live at the Waterhole with me, Ben Coley. I will be your naturalist for the next 2 hours as we go on our daily African odyssey across all of the cameras brought to you by Wild Earth in association with Africam. We've started out at Hyena Pan up in Botswana, a very dry Hyena Pan, and this little oasis of water being taken advantage of by this lone elephant bull and a couple of little starlings flitting around, offering a little bit of colour against this rather monochromatic backdrop at the moment. We had some lovely hyenas enjoying this water yesterday. But remember, this is a live and interactive show, as it always is. So we would love to hear from you, hear what you're up to. And if you have any questions about what we are seeing or anything about nature that you would like to know, I will, as always, do my absolute best to answer those questions for you. So please do keep those questions and comments coming in. This elephant bull casting a rather lonely figure up here in Botswana at the moment, but I imagine he's rather pleased with himself, having found this nice little watering hole all to himself. Of course, these huge animals do have a very high water requirement, particularly this time of the year when they're not getting very much moisture from what they are eating, needing probably a good 150 litres of water a day. But it seems that this elephant has had a drink now, and it's time for a bit of a mud bath. You saw him kicking up and disturbing all of the mud with his front feet, now grabbing chunks of it in his trunk and covering his great body with that mud just to help him against some of this oppressive sunlight this time of year. Temperature's definitely warming up here. It's a scorcher here in Hoedspruit, where I am, in the high 30s, closing in on 40s, but we are looking forward to a bit of a break in the temperature here tomorrow. Temperatures in Hoedspruit at least are going to drop down to the 20s tomorrow, which will be nice. But keeping out of the sun, or keeping oneself protected from the sun, very important this time of year, particularly when there's not much shade being offered by the trees. They all lost their leaves many months ago. Just holding those nutrients deep underground in the roots, keeping them safe and sound in anticipation of the rains, which will hopefully be coming at some point, as you can see from many of the camera feeds. The whole of Southern Africa in dire need of some rain, but that is normal this time of year. We are in or coming to the end of the dry season and crossing fingers for some moisture over the next few months. Good morning to you, old punkster. I'm glad you could join us. If it's morning for you, I guess you are a lot further west than we are. It's just gone 12:30 over here in Central African time. But regardless of where you are and what time it is, I hope you will enjoy all of these wonderful scenes that we will be bringing you over the next couple of hours. Even if this elephant is intent on showing us perhaps not his best side currently. And hello, Joanne Mello. Happy Monday to you as well. Thank you for tuning in. A little cursory glance over his shoulder there. Okay, I think we're going to head from Hainapan in Botswana up to Old Donyo Lodge and see what's happening in Kenya. And we have another elephant bull doing exactly the same thing, taking advantage of the conditions here, sharing his waterhole with a few guinea fowl by the looks of it. As those of you who watch this waterhole regularly will know, they tend to drink that side. I'm pretty sure there's a little pipe there that is just feeding a small trickle to keep that waterhole active, although it has definitely dried up a lot over the last month or two. Elephants, of course, always intent on finding the freshest water source, even if that means just taking a trickle from a pipe that is feeding the area. Unathi, this is your first visit to Live at the Waterhole. Well, a very warm welcome to you. And yes, we are always looking forward to what we might see. Of course, being live, sometimes we don't see much, and other times we see some incredible things here. Generally, I can expect, or you can expect to see plenty of elephants during the heat of the day. They do like to come down and quench their thirst and have their little mud baths. Up here at Oldonyo in Kenya, it was very active yesterday. We had some big herds of zebra. We also saw some eland. We saw some East African oryx and a variety of other animals, some giraffe. So a highlight yesterday was a couple of hyenas sitting in hyena pan, rather ironically. And we also had some beautiful close-up views of some baboons in Lentoro in Kenya as well. But who knows what we might see? That's the beauty of this and why we all love what we do out here, that we could be sitting here watching this elephant and a lioness might stroll past the camera at any moment. Okay, we're going to continue our tour of southern Africa. We're going to zoom all the way down to the eastern side of South Africa to Tembe Elephant Park. Always a hive of activity here, plenty of water birds, impala enjoying the shade, and as is very normal, as the name would suggest, at Tembe Elephant Park, we have some bulls coming down to drink. Very rarely see breeding herds here. In fact, I can't remember the last time I saw breeding herds here. It's normally the bulls making use of this hot time of the day. Young bull lumbering in from the back. Interesting to see this bull on the right. He had a bit of a fiddle around with that sort of root sticking out, now playing around with another branch. Just wondering if he's that sort of displacement behavior. He's unsure, possibly a bit intimidated by this big bull that we're seeing on the left. He's just sort of biding his time in the shadows there. Perhaps didn't want to come down for a drink in case it was deemed some sort of challenge. So I see that as a little bit of respectful distance keeping at the moment. Let's see what happens if this big bull comes a little closer, whether he reacts at all. So we normally associate sort of these interesting social interactions with the breeding herds, but these bachelor herds also have their own little hierarchies, their own relationships between animals, and always very interesting to watch them. These sort of little subtle differences in behavior and body language, trying to figure out exactly what they're thinking is all part of the fun. Okay, let's head up to Juma in the northern sector of the Sabi Sands and see what's happening at Gary Dam. Ooh, we've got some buffalo. Nice. Hello, big boy. Obviously had a little bit of fun in the muds there. So these old bulls, often termed as dugger boys out here in South Africa, dugger being an African word for mud, and they do have a tendency to roll around in the mud. Oh, oh wow. Okay. From one there became many. Spectacular. Look at this. So lovely to see these big herds. We do see big herds of buffalo coming through this area of the Sabi Sands during the winter months. In the summer months, we don't see them quite so often because being very much bulk grazing animals, they require great swathes of grassland to feed all of these hungry mouths, as you would think. And just north of the Sabi Sands is the Manueleti Game Reserve. Manueleti has a lot more open areas and a lot more grass and slightly less wooded vegetation, in places at least. So those Great Plains are very attractive to these large um, uh, large grazing animals. So they often spend a lot of time up in the Manueleti and only make occasional forays a little bit further south. It's all dictated by the rock type, of course, and what vegetation grows there. For those of you wondering what that seething mass is there, those are the poor sharp-toothed catfish, which normally inhabit the dam, but as the water is drying up, they are being corralled into what's left of the water. and trying to keep themselves as moist as possible. But even if it does dry up, they are more than capable of burying themselves into the sand and even actually coming out onto dry land and kind of waddling along on their sort of rigid fins to try and find more water sources. They can coat their body in a kind of a mucus to try and stop them from drying out. And if they do have to bury themselves in the sand, they slow their metabolism down and await the arrival of more water. But this female's got an excellent idea. Just hanging out in the pool. But so back to the Manuletti, so the rock type, the dominant rock type here in the sands is a granite, which leads to a fairly sandy soil, which is not the greatest for your grasses. But these gabbro sills, which is gabbro is a particular type of rock that forms these horizontal. Oh, look, we've got a yellow-billed oxpecker. Nice. The one at the back with the two-toned beak. There's a sill is a sort of a horizontal layer of a particular type of rock which is much finer grained. There's plenty of it in the Manuletti there, and as erosion has taken place over millions of years, those horizontal intrusions have been uncovered and weathered away and have led to a different type of soil, which is, say, much more preferable for grasses as opposed to trees. And so that's why the buffalo tend to head up there during the summer months. But what a lovely way to see the difference between yellow-billed and red-billed oxpeckers. We've got a couple of young yellow-bills close by, and that is red and yellow right next to each other. You can see the heavier set bill of the yellow-billed oxpecker. All of them feasting on the ticks which are inhabiting these buffalo. The red-billed generally go for the smaller, what we call pepper ticks, which are sort of the first instars, the baby ticks, basically. Whereas the yellow-billed go for the more adult, much more engorged ticks. So another perfect example of two very similar species occupying different ecological niches so that they can all benefit from what is available. Nature doesn't work if everything does the same thing. They would run out of resources very quickly. So even similar species will have slightly different behaviors, slightly different habitat requirements, slightly different diets. And that just allows multiple species to occupy the same ecosystem, which is very important. An ecosystem is built on a scaffolding of all these different relationships. And the more relationships you've got, the less severe it is if one of them was to be damaged. Beautiful close-up views. With their bills open, they're not singing. They are trying to lose heat. It's very hot. You can see the buffalo panting heavily. Birds can't sweat, but what they can do is open their beaks like this and sort of pump their tongue, and that creates airflow, and they can lose heat through the mucous membranes within the beak and on the tongue. Spectacular images these are, wow. Such vivid colours. Joe McClellan, a good morning to you. I'm sorry, it's a chilly start where you are. 45, I assume that's degrees Fahrenheit, because if that was degrees Celsius, I would not call it chilly. That's closer to what we would expect in summer in Celsius. And Mercedes being, yes, that poor dam, but doing what it's supposed to do, supporting all of these animals, a true lifeline for them in this difficult time of the year. So Joanne Mello commenting, yeah, a lot of buffalo, they do need the rain badly, but it will come. It might not come just yet, it's still quite early. We'll be hoping for a deluge in the not too distant future. But these really are beautiful images of these oxpeckers. I don't think we've ever had such close view of oxpeckers here, busying themselves, poking around in that very coarse fur of the buffalo, getting rid of all those ticks, potentially over 100,000 ticks on an old buffalo bull, so there is plenty to go around. Catherine also commenting on these awesome close-ups. And Unathi, yes, beautiful colours on the beak. So the yellow-billed is a very beautiful bird. It's incredibly vibrant, these colours. So it helps to contrast contrast against the darker coloration of most of the feathers on the bird, and the darker colour of the buffalo really makes those colours stand out. There's a red-billed on the right. Yeah, good job staying just out of reach of those sweeping horns, occasionally irritating the buffalo, but there's not much they can do about it. They pretty much just accept it these days. And say, doing a good job. But what you see there is one of the potential issues of oxpeckers. They not only feed on the ticks, they actually after the blood of the animal. And that's why they're feeding on the ticks, which have already got blood inside them. But if that animal has an open wound of some description like this, then oxpeckers do have a tendency to pick at it, taking any of that blood and that sort of scar tissue, which can, in some cases, mean it takes a lot longer to heal and can lead to secondary infection. So, not always a good thing to have oxpeckers, but a small price to pay for being cleaned on such a regular basis. Benefit, of course, of having somebody cleaning your wounds. It might stay open for longer, but at least it's kept clean, and flies tend not to lay their eggs in it. I'm sure those ticks will eat the fly eggs given the opportunity because they are basically insectivorous birds. And Pink Kelly, you were asking whether oxpeckers are entirely dependent on mammals for their food. Not entirely dependent, but the vast majority of the stomach contents of oxpeckers that have been examined contain ticks, but they have been observed hawking insects and catching their own insects as well. But generally speaking, they make use of these mobile buffets that are moving through the bushes. Quite the scene, probably a couple of hundred buffalo hanging out here. Catherine, I'm glad you've made it back from Kenya. I believe you're back in Germany, if I recall. Yes, and I imagine it was a bit of a shock to the system from a temperature perspective, so I'm glad that you could warm up virtually, as you put it. Yeah, a bit of a scorcher here in this area, so forecast to be about 38, and having stepped outside a little bit earlier, I can believe that to be true. Agile little things hopping around. If you have a look at the foot structure, if we can see a close-up of it, you'll see that unlike that classic foot structure of a bird that you might draw with three toes forward and one toe back, which is what we call an ansiodactylous foot structure, oxpeckers have evolved and adapted to grasping hold of things and hopping around on these animals. So you'll notice that most of them are holding their toes in a two toes forward and two toes backward shape, which we have given the fancy name of zygodactylus. And it's the outside toe that's actually reversible, so it can be three forward, one back, or two forward, two back. Generally speaking, that's what you'll see. It just allows them to grasp hold of that fur and maneuver their way all around the buffalo, under the belly, into the ears, reach the parts that other birds cannot reach. They have long claws as well, adapted for grabbing hold of the skin. So that one's going 3 forward, 1 back, but say it has that one of those toes is reversible, so they can have 2 either side for better grip. A little bit like a chameleon's hands, I suppose. But these are incredible views. Long, sturdy tail feathers as well to give them a little bit of balance. They can brace against them, just like a woodpecker, even more so in the case of a woodpecker. And there we have an African fisher eagle. It's just biding his or her time until the buffalo have made way. And then this thing will be probably very, very satiated at the moment, having an absolute field day with that mass of catfish in the center of the dam. Very nice to see lots of yellow-billed oxpeckers. We're seeing them more and more now over the last few years. They were almost eradicated from southern Africa many years ago due to the blanket spraying of DDTs and insecticides being used by farmers and things to control tick loads on livestock, which is what these animals were looking for. But they did such a good job of removing all of the ticks at one point that there was no food left pretty much for these oxpeckers. So they pretty much left southern Africa, or South Africa at least, although you did find them further north in Zimbabwe and Botswana. But they have begun to spread back down south again, and they are becoming pretty much mainstays now. See them right in the southern end of Kruger, but they do enjoy buffalo more than anything else. Occasionally you see them on giraffe, but they prefer the larger predators. Sorry, the larger herbivores. You can see that scissoring motion of the beak. Those will be looking for the little pepper ticks, the small ticks that are just sort of hiding in and amongst those hairs. Busy, busy, busy. Because when the rains do arrive, so will the ticks en masse. All the little ticks will be hatching. We have to be very careful walking through the bushes. I have seen areas of grass that just looks bright orange because they are just covered with all of these little nymphs of ticks, so baby ticks pretty much. And you really don't want to get them all over your legs. They can be very, very itchy. Of course, they can carry rickettsia or tick bite fever, down here in South Africa, which is transmissible to humans. So it's kind of like a mild malaria, pretty much. And you kind of expect to have it at some point. I've had it a couple of times. First time you get it's pretty nasty, but your body builds up antibodies to it. And then sort of the second or the third time you have it, it's not quite so severe. Antibiotics, and you should be right as rain in a few days. Interesting to see how the color of the eye was changing there. They look red, and then at angles they looked yellow. I hadn't noticed that before. Sorry, everybody, I lost my connection for a second, but I am back, and we are down at the Elephant Park again in the Future Land. Apologies for that. But Deborah, yes, one of the busiest times we've seen at Gowrie Dam. Amazing to see so many buffalo together, and what a lovely sight it is, especially to be in a massive herd of buffalo and have them sort of envelop your car, and their constant communications with each other. Looks like there's a nice breeze that's been building. The track is oppressive as it does up there at the Juma. And these yellow-billed storks also enjoying the breeze and what looks to be a lovely day for sure. Everybody's migrating towards the right-hand side of the dam now. If the summer comes, we will have our dung beetles back, and they will be able to process all of that dry dung you can see lying around, which accumulates during the winter. That unfortunately has pretty much run its course of good stuff now, although there's still plenty of decomposing wooded material, which will benefit from the rains when the rain comes and gets soaked into the soil. It won't be long until our dung beetles return, to busy themselves by processing all of that dung, making their little balls and lighting their ancestors. They will roll them around, and we will probably unfairly laugh at them as they try and go up hills and roll back down to the bottom. And we will have to make that difficult technical decision as to whether we are going to assist them or let nature take its course. It's one of my favourite times of the year, is summer for that. If I can get over the horrific heat and humidity that often accompanies it, then it does bring back this complete myriad of insect life and all the fun and games that comes with it. Yes, they can be annoying in the evenings. They accumulate around the spotlight. We have a massive amount of ticks that we have to deal with and everything else. Sorry, everybody, I was just having a few audio issues, but hopefully you can hear me better now. So I was waxing lyrical about the dung beetles and when they return and all the other interesting little insects that come back during the summer. It's one of my favorite books to take out on drive with me as my insect book. It's probably the most well-thumbed book in my collection because there are just so many. It's easy enough to, well, easy enough, but it's less challenging to remember the bird species here. But when you're rooting around for insects, there's always something new and so many things. And even in a insect book, which has got probably 600 or 700 pages with multiple pictures on every page, there are still many things that I've never seen before, and also many things that just don't seem to be in the book. Because there's such a wide variety out here, and every now and again you do come across different species, but there are some wonderful groups out there online and on Facebook sites and so on and so forth, where you can send in these pictures to experts and they will offer their opinions. And very occasionally, you find something which hasn't been seen before, or certainly hasn't been recorded in your area. But such is the wealth of diversity in the insect and the arthropod world in general that it's unsurprising, to be honest. There are some strange creatures out there. I was doing a little bit of reading on parasites and things the other day, and it reminded me of something which I've never seen, but does occur apparently down here in South Africa, which is a very unusual little parasite called a green-banded brood sac. And this thing has a really, really unusual life cycle. It starts out life in a bird's stomach, and then when it is fully mature, it is deposited by the bird when the bird defecates. And then it is eaten by a snail. And this little parasite, or the eggs, sorry, are in the bird dung. Eaten by the snail, these little eggs get ingested by the snail, and the little, I suppose you'd call it a larvae or a nymph, I'm not even sure what the correct term would be, slowly develops into this sort of, it's like a worm, basically. I believe it's a type of velvet worm or a tapeworm or something similar. And it migrates all the way through the snail's body and ends up in those little antennae that snails have, those little sort of eye stalks, basically. And once they get into the eye stalk, they swell up and they're green, so they show through the very thin uh, cuticle layer of that snail and they pulsate. Um, and it also messes with the snail's ability to register light and dark. So normally snails don't like direct sunlight. They'll shelter away from it, bury themselves in the ground, or at least go to very shaded areas. But it seems to lose the ability to figure this out and will often sit on an exposed area of a branch with these eye sockets, which it now can't retract back into its head, pulsing green, attracting the attention of a bird. A bird comes down, rips off the eye socket or eats the snail, and then this little parasite ends up back in the stomach of a bird where it can lay new eggs and deposit those eggs, and the whole cycle continues. So there are some weird and wonderful pictures online and little videos you can see of these pulsating green eye stalks of snails thanks to this little internal parasite. But that's just one of many really rather unusual and, to be honest, unpleasant if you're a snail parasites that do occupy the world. Just one of many. But nature has an incredible way of getting the job done, and it's not always the most pleasant way. I forget what it's called, but there's another one that lives in grasshoppers and causes grasshoppers to drown themselves because they want to end up in a fish, if I remember rightly. So somehow they get from the fish into the grasshopper, and then once ready to drop off the eggs, it messes with the grasshopper's brain and causes the grasshopper to basically commit suicide by jumping into the water so that it can return there again. The most famous example there is probably the cordyceps fungus, which some of you may have heard of. Those are things that afflict ants. It's these little fungus that get into the ant's body and then slowly multiply and grow inside there, feeding off the ant's body fluids, but not touching the internal organs. Otherwise, that would, of course, lead to the demise of the ant before it is ready. And then when it is time to release its spores, it gets up into the ant's brain, and its hyphae, its little tentacles of this fungus, affects the brain of the ant and cause it to go up high somewhere and then anchor its jaws onto the branch. So it clamps on, and that's pretty much the last thing the ant is going to do with its life. It then slowly, sorry, it's all quite brutal, but then slowly dies as the fungus absorbs its brain, and then eventually the fungus starts to grow little, I suppose, mushrooms, for want of a better word, that pop out through the little gaps in the cuticle of the ant and release their spores, which then rain down from a high height to be eaten by another ant. And the whole process continues. It's something called this cordyceps fungus, and it sounds a horrific way to go. But it's one of the reasons ants, being a social insect, that if you've ever noticed a dead ant somewhere, other ants come quite quickly and they kind of dismember it and they carry it away from the rest of the group because they are very conscious of a pathogen or something like that getting into the community or to the social structure. And when ants die, they give off a specific pheromone. We sort of call it a death pheromone, and it stimulates the other ants to do exactly that, to dismember these individuals and remove them from the periphery, just in case they died from something that might infect the entire colony. Sorry, Jive Bunny, if that was a little bit morbid for you, but and luckily you've had your lunch. Otherwise, I'm sure that would have ruined your appetite. But nature is not always appetizing, but it is fascinating the way it finds to get the job done. But I think the insect world is so interesting to pack so much requirements and all this behavior and even just the bodily organs that makes an insect tick into a body which can be only a few millimeters long is a real miracle. Okay, I think we're going to head over to another of our cameras. I didn't quite catch where we're headed next, so it'll be a nice surprise for all of us. Let's see. Back to Juma and our close-up of our buffalo fur. Yellow-billed oxpecker obviously eaten is full, and it's time to have a little groom. Look at the way he's zipping those feathers back together. See, Bundu, you asking what the difference is between tick bite fever or rickettsia that we have out here and Lyme's disease? I don't know too much about Lyme's disease because it doesn't occur here in South Africa. I know it is a tick-borne disease that you get certainly in the States. But the vector ticks, the type of ticks that carry Lyme disease, don't occur down here in southern Africa. So it's not a disease that we have to deal with here. So quite what the differences are in terms of symptoms, I'm not 100% sure. I will see if I can find out for you. But we don't get Lyme disease, certainly to my knowledge, down here in southern Africa. That is more of a northern hemisphere thing, but both are indeed transferred by ticks, which of course are responsible for potentially passing on a whole host of different diseases. But I'll have to have a look and see what the specific differences are between the two. I think Lyme disease is a bit more serious than tick bite fever. Here it's quite nasty, but you can let it run its course naturally. You'll feel pretty rubbish for a week or 10 days if you don't take antibiotics, but you will recover from it. So it's kind of like a bad flu or a light malaria, really, somewhere between the two. But once you've had it once, so your body builds up natural antibodies to it, and should you get it again, shouldn't be at least anywhere near as bad. Though there are recurring strains of tick bite fever, just like there are malaria. Timwill73, you're asking what insect book that I use for reference. It's called The Insects of Southern Africa. I haven't got it to hand right now to give you the specifics. They've done a few more editions or newer editions since I first got mine, and I should probably get an updated one because some of the names will have changed, and I'm sure there'll be some updated pictures and maybe a few extra species. But it's sort of a photographic guide to the insects of southern Africa, basically. But a good sized book, but small enough to carry around in a backpack, and say one that is always one of the first ones that I pack when I'm going out, particularly during the summer months. And Asbo, you're asking if the oxpeckers do they get ticks and how are they themselves cleaned? I don't think they have. I've never seen oxpeckers groom one another. We know that birds do get ticks, but I would imagine that to some extent it will remove ticks from its own body where it can reach them. Also, the uropigial gland, the preen gland that waterproofs the feathers and keeps the feathers in good condition, will also act as an antibacterial agent. They dust bathe, so they shake around in the mud to try and dislodge any ectoparasites on the skin. And then there, of course, there is the behavior known as anting. I'm not sure whether oxpeckers specifically indulge in anting or whether they have been recorded doing so, but we know some birds do, where they will either purposely irritate some ants and lie there and let the ants swarm over the body because they themselves, the ants, will potentially eat some of those little parasites. And also the formic acid that they produce will act as an insect repellent. And there are even cases of birds, and you can watch videos of this where they actually pick up an ant and sort of hold it in their beak and then wipe it through their feathers, transferring some of that formic acid onto the feathers to act as a natural insect repellent. So lots of different ways that they will deal with them. But yes, you would think that hanging around on a buffalo, they might pick up plenty of ticks themselves. This one busying itself with that little open wound. It's amazing, these close-ups of these oxpeckers. These few buffalo finding some of the limited shade available around the dam. This one having a good rest. Interesting to me to look at how the eyes change colour with the different angles of the light. Because normally when we see the yellow-billed oxpeckers, they have a red eye, which we can see at certain angles, and then as the bird changes its head, it certainly does show as yellow. So I've never noticed that before. I shall have to examine oxpeckers a little more closely, I think. But the books will say that they have a red eye. But there are obviously some different angles of light that causes different wavelengths. We sort of see that with the iridescence of starlings and the like. Those sort of shimmering effects. The giraffe going to try his luck now that there's a little bit of a gap at the water. Avoid the buffalo. Yeah, maybe. Giraffe are so nervous when they come down to drink. That might have perturbed this young female for a little while. They'll pluck up the courage again to approach the waterhole. Ian, you're asking about parasites on elephants. Well, they do get ticks, not in such numbers as something like buffaloes do, but they, oh, there's another fish eagle. They do get ticks. They also various worms and fleas and gadflies and things that can affect elephants, but definitely not the same sort of numbers that we would expect to see on things like buffalo, certainly. Of course, they don't have the added help of oxpeckers. Elephants will not tolerate oxpeckers. They've got quite sensitive skin, and when you have a trunk that can rid yourself of the oxpeckers, they seem to prefer to do so. And Fuller, I'm sorry we're upsetting your cat with all these close-ups of the oxpeckers. I hope your cat is not launching itself at the TV and doing itself damage. But yeah, those have been some absolutely beautiful images of these oxpeckers. I've never seen such close-up shots of oxpeckers before. Pretty awesome if we get to see this fish eagle come down and help itself to that little buffet of catfish in the middle of the dam. Sort of look online about sort of specific ticks for elephants, and it seems there have been at least 8 species of ticks that have been found on elephants. And interestingly, one um, which doesn't even have an English name, so I won't worry you with the scientific name, but there's only ever been found on elephants, and interestingly, the grey daker. So very much a case of little and large. I'm wondering why they would prefer those two animals. If I was going to put two close together, you could almost understand sort of elephants and rhinos or elephants and hippos, but an elephant and a grey daker seem pretty far apart in terms of morphology. But there you go. So nature works in mysterious ways. Apparently, up to 27 of the hard-shelled tick species have been collected from African elephants across various parts, of course. Nice when you've got a built-in pillow like that. Diane UK, I'm glad you're enjoying those close-up. Yes, we've been spoilt today with some of the closest views of birds that I think I can ever remember on here, particularly of yellow-billed oxpeckers. You almost see down their gullet when they've got their mouth open, trying to get rid of some of that heat. Doesn't look like the sort of place I would like to lie in. So, having done that mud wallow on Juma with Tess about 18 months or 2 years ago, I was surprised with actually how sort of soothing it was and how cool it was. That's for sure. So you can do kind of see why the animals like a good mud bath to take away some of the heat. But say I was more concerned with the fact that I found a freshwater crab in there and a water scorpion, and did make me wonder what other things I was sharing that little mud wallow with. But all good fun. Fuller, if you're still watching, I suggest you cover your cat's eyes just in case. But these really are incredible images. Another thing that really did get in the way of the yellow-billed oxpeckers, of course, was the rinderpest virus that came through Africa in the sort of the late 1800s. It was brought in by European settlers, and it decimated the buffalo population, upon which the yellow-billed oxpeckers were reliant. In fact, African buffalo, or the Cape buffalo, almost became extinct back then. It's obviously done very well to recover, but it's just taken an awful lot of time for yellow-billed oxpeckers to come back down this further south, or this far south. I think, yes, and there's a red-billed, just for comparison's sake. It does look as if they're all shouting and singing, but they've all been muted. There's the gape, which is the part that we can see of the bird here, sort of inside the mouth. Very important for parents in identifying chicks. Youngsters have got massive gapes and often have got interesting sort of patterns within the gape, which is supposed to stimulate the adults to feed them. So a very common example of that is the blue waxbill that inside has a sort of interesting sort of three-spot pattern. And then you also get in the brood parasites, because the cuckoos are starting to return now. I heard my first red-chested cuckoo yesterday. The classes cuckoos are calling. So those brood parasitic birds that lay their eggs in other birds' nests, when those interloper chicks hatch, you'll often find that the gapes, the patterns and the colours on the inside of those beaks will match the pattern and colour of the host species. Because if it didn't, the parents might avoid feeding it, thinking or realizing that it's maybe not one of theirs or that there's a problem with it, and they might avoid it. So again, really clever examples of mimicking in nature. And then you also get what are called gents, or I'm never quite sure how to say it, but Gentes. And that's something we associate with brood parasites that parasitize multiple different species. So things like greater honey guides and red-chested cuckoos, which are not host-specific parasites. So something like the African cuckoo only parasitizes a fork-tailed drongo. But a greater honey guide, red-chested cuckoo have got 10, potentially 20 or more different host species that they might lay their eggs in those birds' nests. And they mimic the eggs, their chicks mimic the gape color and pattern, as I said. But a cuckoo is not able to decide, I'm laying my eggs today in a white-browed scrub robin's nest or in a white-browed robin chat's nest and change its eggs and chicks' gate patterns accordingly. So you'll tend to find that an individual red-chested cuckoo will always parasitize the same species because that particular genetic code within that individual bird is going to match that specific host. So even though the parasite, let's keep calling it a cuckoo for now, even though the cuckoo is able to parasitize multiple bird species, one individual will tend to only parasitize one individual species, so it doesn't have to worry about the differences between them. But brood parasitism, one of my favorite topics. I just think it's such an incredible example of nature over nurture. If you think that chick that has been born into another family has never seen another cuckoo, it's never heard another cuckoo, it's grown up in association with this other species of bird, yet it still retains that genetic information that it is a cuckoo. It understands and can speak the cuckoo language. It knows to mate with another cuckoo and not one of the host species that it's been reared alongside. It knows when and where to migrate to, because with the exception of the classes cuckoo, pretty much all the other cuckoos in southern Africa are intra-African migrants. There's the European cuckoo as well, of course, which goes further afield. And yet it knows when it's an adult to mate with another cuckoo and that it shouldn't build its own nest, that it should lay its eggs in another bird's nest. No one's ever informed it of that. It just knows. Perfect example of encoded genetic knowledge and nature over nurture. As buffalo is encrusted with mud. Fuller indeed. This is a Monday mud bath. Maybe we should have mud bath Mondays. It sounds like a good idea in the summer. Buffalo littering the landscape around Gowrie Dam. Lovely to see so many little ones as well. And this one has prime position. It's definitely a female, this one. Easy to tell by looking at the horns. You can see the hair in between and the far less heavy set horns. The males have that great boss, as we call it, where the horns join in the middle, a little bit like a judge's wig. Enormous volume of bone protecting the brain casing. Hard-headed in nature as well as in biology. Okay, well, these beautiful views of Buffalo, I don't think they're going anywhere, so we're going to zoom up to Kenya to Lentore and see what's happening at the waterhole there. We had some olive baboons yesterday. Let's see what's up there now. Or maybe we'll stay at Juma a little longer. It looked like a little head of a terrapin that was poking out of the water there. Okay, well, it seems we've come back up to Botswana, rather. And we've got some ellies enjoying the fresh water from this little well just next to the dam, covering the face in water. Very harsh environment up there at the moment. You can see from that elephant dung on the right just how reddish in colour it was, because all these elephants have really got to eat at the moment is the cambium and little twigs. And that tannin contained in there, turning their dung a very sort of rich, vibrant, rusty red. Okay, sorry everyone, we seem to have a camera issue up there, but so we've come back to our buffalo. The little one peering at us under the legs of the adult. You do get to see any of the babies suckling. I always find it interesting that they tend to suckle from under the tail, in between mum's back legs, as opposed to in front of the legs, which is in most other herbivores. But that's an adaptation to being a herd animal and the tendency of the herd to stampede or to escape from potential danger, being out in the open. If that little one was from in front of mum's legs and the whole herd decided to take off, then there will be a risk of trampling. So if you are accessing from under the tail and mum takes off, you're just wondering what happened and can rush to keep up quickly. And that was not a baby buffalo, that was a warthog, just in case. Look at them all. Sea of buffalo. So even a buffalo is a thriving ecosystem in itself, covered in ticks and parasites, feeding at least two species of birds, and of course the terrapin that we briefly saw pop his head up in that dam will also be thoroughly enjoying this. Ordered takeout. Buffalo lying in the water or standing in the water, the terrapins will flock towards them and also feed on the ticks in any areas that the terrapin can reach, because they themselves are carnivorous as opposed to turtles or tortoises, which are strictly herbivorous by nature. More perfect examples of that interconnectedness of the ecosystem and the food chain, complex food chains that exist within them. And indeed, the dam is very, very dry at the moment. But say, let's hope there is the possibility of rain being forecast for next week in this area, but to trust weather forecasts so far ahead, particularly this time of year, I'm not putting too much faith in them yet. But if you've been watching for many years, you'll know that we tend to get, admittedly, more sort of December, January, February time, some heavy rains. The ground is so dry, it just can't handle all of that water, and we end up with some fairly intense flooding. A lot of the drainage lines overflow, and we aren't unable to cross certain areas. And it does happen every few years. People have to get choppered out of lodges because the water table or the ground simply cannot absorb the water fast enough. So we will hope for one of those deluges. What we really like is little and often, as opposed to a great big chunk of rain falling at once, because then most of it washes away. It'd be nice to have it sustained light rains over a long period would do the world or the bush a world of good. But it's always amazing to see how quickly it responds. Just a single good falling of rain, and you'll see the bush spring to life within days afterwards. Green shoots coming through. It looks like someone sort of spray painted the ground with green paint. You just get this flush of grass coming through so quickly. And a lot of the trees have started to bud already, producing their new shoots in anticipation. So we will hope. Everybody needs to do some rain dances, I think. That lower jaw working overtime, ruminating what they've already eaten. So maybe a four-chambered stomach, regurgitating food up from the rumen, rechewing it, making it, grinding it into smaller and smaller particles so that those particles can then pass through into the next of those four chambers, the reticulum, and then on to the omasum and the abomasum, where finally that absorption can take place. The rumen's almost like a sieve, basically, that holds on to that food that can then be reprocessed and reprocessed, try and make use of all of that goodness. Of course, best seen in giraffe. You can actually watch them, that peristaltic action of the stomach. You can watch that little bolus of food sort of make its way up the throat, watch the giraffe chew it for a little bit, to then follow that ball as it slips back down the throat again to be reused. Oh, this poor little one struggling to get through the mud. Very sticky in there. Keep going, buddy. Keep those legs pounding. 4x4, diff lock engaged. So potentially dangerous time for herbivores to come down to the water. You don't want to get stuck in there. It does happen from time to time. Adam, good timing. Would a reserve intervene if an animal was stuck in the mud? Um, Probably, but unofficially. In a perfect world, we're not supposed to because that's a natural problem that the animal has encountered. It's not a man-made problem. The general rule is that if an animal was to be hit by a car or get entangled in a fence because that has been caused by human influence, then that's something that we are quite within our rights to assist with. But natural problems should normally be left to natural answers. But, and I speak from experience here, I mean, if you come to a waterhole and there's an animal floundering that's been stuck in the mud and is obviously going to waste away there, generally speaking, say unofficially, we probably do help. Whether we should or shouldn't is up for debate, but it's very hard when you know you can help not to. Still want this fish eagle to go and grab himself a catfish. So I mentioned this the other day, Adam, but I have done that. I found an Inyala stuck in the mud at a reserve, at a waterhole there. It was obviously a really bad area because there was some carcasses of other animals that had also got stuck in the mud. This thing was incredibly weak and did pull it out with the help of my tracker and dragged it to safety, but we were too late. We went back to check on it later that afternoon and it had succumbed. But being out in direct sunlight, the effort that it obviously had to um, put out to try and get itself free and failed. It was just all too much for it. The stress, the heat stress, the dehydration, which was rather unfortunate. But we tried. But in that particular case, it was to no avail. Elephant's done an incredible job of coating himself from head to toe. Look at this beautiful big bull just having some alone time there. See all where the hair has been rubbed off his face as he's been scratching up against branches and things. That jaw moving, reprocessing that material. They're quite happy to eat fairly low quality produce, these buffalo, so important that they can get as much nutritional value out of it as possible. So we've got two separate pools of floundering catfish now as well. This poor girl definitely got a bit of a limp. Potentially easy prey for a predator. Of course, where there are big herds of buffalo, there are often lions in pursuit. But such is the protective instinct of the herd and that mobbing behavior, well known for chasing away lions. This female's still, as long as she can keep up with the herd and remain with the group, will still have a good chance of surviving for a little while. But she definitely looks a little bit uncomfortable, not moving very freely at all. I'm not picking up any audio coming through, but I'm assuming that this oxpecker is vocalizing or calling. It sounds so very much like crackling electricity almost. It's not a very tuneful noise that oxpeckers make, but very characteristic noise that all of us as guides know very, very well, as its sound can alert you to the presence of an animal in the bush. Could be something as small as a warthog or an impala, but it might just be an old Duggar boy hiding in the bushes, or a rhino perhaps as well. A sound that very much is ingrained in us from day one to remember and to learn and to react to. And the animals also know this call. If the birds all suddenly fly up off their back and giving off an alarm call, then the animals will react to that stimulus as well and be very much on the alert. But amazing the diversity of sounds that can come out of a bird's mouth. Remember, what we hear is only a small proportion. Our ears are too primitive to pick up all of the subtle differences and the tunes and the notes that come out. And if you listen to a sonogram of a bird or look at a sonogram of a bird, there's a lot more happening than we can hear. But the way that birds produce sound, their equivalent of a voice box, is known as a syrinx. And it's situated right at the top of the trachea, so it can have air coming in from both lungs simultaneously, and it can pump air in from either side and produce multiple notes because there's multiple channels of air coming in, going through different pathways. The word syrinx is a bit of an odd one. It actually has its roots in Greek mythology, from a nymph who had a beautiful singing voice, who was being pursued by the god of the wild, who was known as Pan. And Pan was pursuing Shrinks through the forest. Shrinks was none too keen on his advances, so she chose to hide next to the river in the reeds. Pan lost sight of her, couldn't find her. But whilst he was looking for her in and amongst the reeds, the wind blew and blew across some of the tops of the open reeds, produced a lovely sound, a bit like blowing across the top of a bottle. And Pan heard this, enjoyed this, so he then cut reeds of different lengths and fashioned what we now call panpipes. So where you've got those different lengths tubes that you blow across to make a tune. So that also has its origins in the story of the god of the wild, Pan, who's represented in the stars by Capricorn, the sea goat. Bit of a weird one, Capricorn, a half man, a half goat, half fish. Not the sort of thing you'd expect to come across, but again has its origins in a great battle the gods had with a monster called Typhon, and Pan turned himself into a goat to flee from the monster, and then jumped into a river and turned his bottom half into a fish to escape. which he did so, but Zeus was not too lucky, and Zeus was sort of semi-dismembered by the great god Typhon, but Pan helped stitch him back together again, and to honour him for this great work, Zeus placed him in the stars as Capricorn, or Capricornus. It's said that when they overpowered the great monster Typhon, that they buried him under Mount Etna over in Europe, which is why that mountain still smoulders. So there's a very angry monster Typhon underneath the volcano, apparently. See the beautiful network of veins on the back of this elephant bull and the big bulbous mound of muscle that is the masticator jaws. All of that chewing that they have to do. Perfect example of the behaviour that leads to those sort of white patches under the eyes that you see in older buffalo, tending to scratch around under the eyes and underneath the horns. I think Helen Parler went down, saw the state of the water, and thought, you know what, I might be thirsty, but maybe there are better water sources to find at the moment. Dive Bunny, I'm glad you're enjoying the show and the wide variety that I and my colleagues can give you in terms of information. It's the beauty of having so many of us doing this. We all have our own interests, and there's so much information available to us now to read, so many papers, so many websites, so many books that we can get our hands on. It's impossible to know everything. So hopefully by listening to us all, it gives you a nice, well-rounded experience. Lenny, you recently watched a zebra foal and a baby elephant get stuck at Tau, who were both rescued. Well, I'm glad that was the case, but yes, this time of year, unfortunately, it is a massive risk, and it's a catch-22 for those animals. They have to get down to the water, but such is the foot traffic down there that just say stirs up this enormous muddy, say quagmire, for want of a better word. One has to tread very carefully. Oh, it must be a horrible way to go to get stuck in the mud like that. So whether we should or shouldn't is a debate for another day, but I know for one that as long as it's safe for me to do so, I would find it and have found it very difficult to walk away from that situation, knowing that I have the ability to help. Okay, well, we've spent some seriously quality time, the buffalo here at Juma. Let's head up to Kenya to Oldonyo Waterhole and see who's joined us there. Couple of plucky giraffe who are desperate for a drink, but yeah, I don't think they're going to like the idea of getting too close to those elephants. Looks like a big bull coming in from the back. We'll see whether he's got any more metal. It was a dangerous proposition. I'm sure many of you saw the incident a few months ago where a musting bull kind of speared a giraffe who was just quite casually having a drink for no apparent reason. So the giraffe tentative at the best of times to come and have a drink due to their somewhat vulnerable status when they have to bend those legs or spread those legs to get their neck down to the water. But I would imagine they will all wait patiently for the elephants to quench their thirst and take the opportunity when they can. This bull covered in oxpeckers as well. But, yeah, a little bit more confidence than the females, perhaps, and the youngsters. Let's see if he runs the pachyderm gauntlet and goes in for a drink. Elephants seem to be quite tolerant of him at the moment. A huge boy on the right there, size of his head. Nice old bull, this one. You can see that sort of lump of calcium in front of his ossicones and the big sort of bulbous protrusions above his eyes. Penelope Kenyon, yes, some serious tusks on these three. A formidable trio indeed. So Jive Bunny was saying they used a rope for the baby elephant. I'm surprised that the rest of the herd didn't try and help the baby elephant. Maybe they did for a while and potentially even gave up hope, but I'm glad they were able to rescue him or her. And yes, some of the rangers nearly got stuck as well. I'm not surprised. I have lost a shoe or two over the years going to, it's just like glue sometimes. Beautiful eyelashes on this cow looking on. Of course, there is a constellation named after the giraffe as well, Camelopardis, which is a northern hemisphere constellation. We don't really get to see it here in the southern hemisphere, or at least from our latitude in South Africa. Well, alas, we are coming to the end of another Live at the Waterhole. Bring down the curtain on another great performance from African wildlife from all these different cameras. It's a lovely curtain call here with these three very impressive elephant bulls, and nice to see the occasional giraffe and what looks like a East African oryx hiding behind the elephant on the left. But it's been another wonderful day, and I'm very happy that you have all joined me to share and allowed me to share it with you. Certainly, I think the highlights for today was some of those incredible close-up views of the oxpeckers, both red and yellow, watching them going around their daily lives on the back of that herd of buffalo. Not every day we get to enjoy such close-up views, and really lovely to appreciate the delicate beauty of them in close. But whatever your plans are for the rest of the day, I hope they continue to be spectacular. And that you'll tune in again tomorrow. Don't forget, we do this every day, 365 days a year from 12:30 till 2:30 Central African time. We love hearing from you. We love giving you these wonderful visuals, and we hope that you have enjoyed this window into the African wildlife once again. So it'll be one of my colleagues taking over from me tomorrow, but I'm sure you'll have a wonderful time. So thanks again for all the questions and comments. Really hope you've enjoyed the day. And whatever your plans are from now on, I hope you enjoy them thoroughly.